Hey guys, this is Anthony here. So today I want to do a book review for a book that I recently checked out from my local library and I listened to it. It was an audiobook. It was called The Judgment of Paris by Ross King, The Revolutionary Decade That Gave the World Impressionism. So it was written in around 2006 by Ross King after very extensive research. And the name itself, The Judgment of Paris, is a really great and apt name. So, The Judgment of Paris is not only a large series of paintings, but it's an apt story in Greek mythology, where they have to decide who's the prettiest and fairest of them all, and the mortal choosing, his name is Paris, and he accepts bribery. So it's a bit of a corruption real life story. And as a double entendre, it also means that in the salon, which was in Paris, it was their way of choosing artwork, which would be shown in the salon, and therefore the considered the best artwork in the world, of which the Impressionists often found themselves being rejected with a large red R on the back of their paintings, signaling that they were rejected from the salon. So this is supposed to be the decade leading up to Impressionism. It's not specifically so much about Impressionism. So I think the title is a bit misleading. It's a very creative title, and I think he also thought that out well. But it it doesn't really explain what the book is about. The book is 95% about two people. Neither one are really so heavily involved in Impressionism. Okay? So the first one has almost nothing to do with Impressionism. His name was Jean Louis Ernest Meissonier. So he was the most famous painter of the time. And Ross King goes into extraordinary detail to describe the way that this man would prep for his paintings and start creating his paintings, the kind of palettes he would use, horses. He would create minifigures. He would create stands. He created a railway so that he could sketch a horse in motion before the camera was really used for this purpose. So he describes in great detail, taking up a massive amount of the book, about this guy who wasn't even an Impressionist. But he was the most famous painter of the time, and he was also in Paris. He was a Frenchman. So it is somewhat fitting to talk about him. And then most of the rest of the book is about Edouard Manet, who was more of a realist than an Impressionist, like Monet or Van Gogh. But he spends a lot of time talking about Manet and some of his paintings, like Girl on Balcony, etc., and why they were so controversial and why some of them were rejected. And then he goes on about Napoleon III and how fat the man was and unhealthy the man was, and talking, then again, bringing it back and talking about Meissonier and how he would paint scenes from Napoleon III and his war horse and things like that, and then come back to Manet and talk about how he was struggling as an artist and nobody seemed to appreciate his work as a modernist, as he was called, because he was painting modern times, whereas Meissonier was painting very, very old paintings, going back to Napoleon I or Greek mythology, something very old, not up to date with the times. So this is about 95% of the book is focusing on those two people and how they interacted, or how they didn't interact, because oddly enough, they didn't seem to interact much until the Franco-Prussian War of the 1860s or 1860s, where they were actually both part of the Paris Guard, where it's one of the first actions where civilians ended up guarding a city against the invading Prussians. And yet these men led such different lives. They were so dichotomous. So it is an interesting way to show the book, to represent the times. And he does really give you that feeling of being in that time zone, being in that era, what it was like for the artist submitting to the salon, what it was like for the visitors to the salon, what it was like to be rejected from the salon. He really goes into great detail, what it's like to own a horse, paint a painting. I mean, Messania would take months and months on his paintings, and Manet might finish a few in the span of a few days. So it was a very completely different painting style that was appreciated at the time, and what was later appreciated, because now Messania he's somewhat rejected and nobody really cares about him, but he was a fantastic painter. I just wish he would have spent a little bit more time in the book on some of the other Impressionist artists, or God forbid, mentions some of them. I mean, he barely mentions Cézanne. He barely mentions Monet. He almost only focuses on these two figures. If there is a third figure he focuses on for maybe 2% or so of the book, it would be Napoleon III. Okay, so he's really focusing on two figures who aren't even really Impressionists. Yes, Manet is sometimes considered the father of Impressionism, but I consider him more of a realist, a modernist. He was painting what modern life was like. And this is an age, still a little bit before the camera and before Impressionism. And yes, he liked some rough brushwork, but there were other artists from before. The artist goes into great depths about his travels to Spain, to see some of the artists who were using really kind of rougher brush strokes. But he really doesn't talk a lot about Impressionism. And it takes about 8 hours for him to even get to the first impressionistic exhibit, because they were all the Salon, or the Salon de la Rejectes, it was the Salon of Rejects. And he really doesn't cover Impressionism much at all. This is the time before Impressionism. So if you're looking for a book on Impressionism, this is not for you. If you love Impressionism and you're really looking for some kind of very detailed analysis, you want to feel what they feel, then this is a good book. So I don't think the book was terrible. I know this is sounding like I think the book is crap, but that's not the case, okay? I am more the latter. I really like Impressionism, and I wanted to get a feeling for it. In my opinion, Impressionism is the capturing of an emotion, okay? Because at that time, before that time, paintings were mostly one of two things, as I see it. They were either telling a story, like Greek mythology or the Bible, something like that, or they were painting a portrait, right? You have a lot of portraits of rich people from earlier times, 1800s and earlier. But with the invention of the camera, with this new technology, suddenly things were changing. And the book also covers some of the other technologies that influenced Impressionistic art. Most people would paint in a studio, like Messania. Messania had a massive studio, a solarium. He had an open garden he would paint in. But he was painting at his home. So he painted one of his most famous war paintings of Napoleon III's conquest of blah, blah, blah. At his home, he was posing as Napoleon on his own horse, and he was painting from these and from, sketches of that. And sometimes he had another man playing as Napoleon when he had to do the painting. But I think that with the invention of camera, people started changing. You suddenly, you don't need a painting as a portrait. That's gone, because you can just have a family portrait, a picture taken. And as a story, paintings were still valuable, but that had been done so much. People started to reject it, started to not care. And so you have Impressionism, which tried to capture a fleeting moment, right? And even the name Impressionism, which the book barely talks about, comes from one of Monet's paintings of a sunrise in London when he spent some time there. And they were pushing him for more interesting names than Sunrise number 37. And he said, call it an impression of the sunrise. And so some French papers, in the beautiful French sarcastic way, they started hammering on this. And maybe I'll cover that in another way. I'll probably review that artwork because I think it's a really fantastic piece. But the point is, Impressionism was capturing an emotion. So for me, I wanted to get a better idea of what, especially the French, which were really the inventors of Impressionism, and the people moving to France, like Van Gogh, what I really wanted to do is get an idea of what it was like to live in that time. Okay, this is before World War I. This is still kind of the end of the age of imperialism. And I think this book covers that feeling incredibly. But as a 16-hour-long audiobook, it's only focusing on two people who are not really impressionists. So, and you guys may disagree. You may say that Monet is a great impressionist. That's fine. You may think he's an impressionist, but I don't really think he is. And Messanier, I mean, he did some rougher brushwork works, but his focus was on very small, 12-inch paintings of incredible horses. That's pretty much who he was. So again, if you're really, really into Impressionism and you want to do a real deep dive, this guy has done some really excellent studying and a really great amount of homework to create this book. Okay, he has done it in a very interesting way. And the book kind of travels back and forth between Napoleon III and Monet and then Messanier again. But if you're looking for a book on Impressionism, specifically about Impressionism, how they did what they did, don't get this book. This is before Impressionism, and it's about those two guys. It's basically only about them. So there you have it. Overall, yeah, 3 out of 5. It's not a bad book. It's just the title is misleading in my opinion. The decade that brought you Impressionism, he's still stretching it out to some 20 years, mostly focusing on that decade. But the title is slightly misleading. Don't buy it thinking it's about Impressionism. It is about art, but not specifically Impressionism. Okay, I think you guys got the idea now, and that's the point. So now you know whether to check it out or not, I hope. All right, so yeah, leave me a comment. I love artwork and I like audiobooks, so if there's another book that you think I should listen to and give a review on, let me know. Talk to you guys later.